And so a teaching of our Torah reading this morning. Our Torah reading would be from Leviticus, that middle book of the 5 books, the book in the center that deals with the activity of the center of Jewish life. Namely, in an ancient time, it was the tabernacle in the time of the temple that was at the center of the encampment. It was the temple in Jerusalem that was at the center of Jewish consciousness. We pray for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. We speak of Zion, which is where the temple specifically was located in Jerusalem. And in that light, Leviticus, this middle book, deals with the bringing of offerings by the priests. And it's not the only thing it deals with. There is something that we were reading last week that's called the Holiness Code. Love your neighbor as yourself is in chapter 19, verse 18. That's part of the Holiness Code. But Leviticus, overall, is how we as a people in an ancient time draw close to God. And the rabbis will say that all those descriptions of those different kinds of offerings, the offerings of gratitude, the offerings of sin offering, the offerings on behalf of community of holiday celebration, all those many different kinds of offerings, when the temple was destroyed, continue to be expressed, but rather than through the giving of physical gifts to God, the gifts of our words. And so the work of the temple was called avodah, service, serving of God. And our prayers, the rabbis would call avodat belev, the service of the heart. And so today, for instance, we recited an Amidah a moment ago with our Balat Tfilah. We'll do one more Amidah after the teaching. That's because on Shabbat, in the time of the temple, there would be 2 different community offerings. Only one on a weekday, but on the Sabbath, the Tamid, the continuous everyday offering, and then in honor of Shabbat, Musaf, an additional offering. When we chant the Amidah, the rabbis say, that is in the role of us being priests. Our words become the substitute for what was brought physically in an earlier time. I have this as my introduction because what I want to focus in on is if Torah is a love letter, so our ancestors teach, how we understand the love letter can differed between different readers in terms of what was understood as intention, as the interpretation of words, and how that love letter of Torah was read, unfolded, because ideas and relationships have a history. When a couple stands under the chuppah, traditionally in a Jewish ceremony, standing under the canopy, they have no idea yet what their relationship will look like in 10 years. In terms of, you don't know what different expectations you will have of each other until you have new situations. But when we stand under chuppah, what there is a vow of loyalty, a covenant, a brit, a sense that even though the details will unfold in this relationship, at the core is a commitment, na'aseh v'nishma, to do and then to understand what we're committing to. The details will yet unfold. I will add that that is a perspective in Judaism, but not the only perspective. Namely, some would say that the expectations of a relationship of the Jewish people and God is as old as humankind, meaning it's embedded in creation. That when Torah was revealed at Sinai, God also explained all the details to Moses. One became the written writing, the other became the oral tradition that would be written later. That is not how I approach Torah as a non-Orthodox Jew by choice. I see Torah as precious, as sacred, as a love letter of our people's seeking to understand what it means to live in relationship with the divine, and doing so as a model people with other members of my immediate community and more. As a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, as a nation of priests, a holy people, modeling, and more than modeling, relationship with God, but being God's partners with all of God's creation. And so I want to look at one law to build on this notion, how Jewish tradition authentically, in the eyes of a contemporary Jew, has a history. I love counting the Omer. That's why I knew that today was the 34th day. Every day, with the aid of my app reminding me every night, I am reminded which number to count. Now, I'll tell you, the rabbis loaded the deck, and they did it in no less than the Talmud. I'm pointing at my Talmud. This is one of the tractates of the Talmud called Menachot, which means gifts or offerings, that deal with the counting of the Omer. But our Torah reading, if you pull out a book in front of you, and at home I'm going to read it out loud as well, but page 726. And more, we often read on holidays. The Torah reading that we would be reading today in terms of the flow. And if you turn the page, you'll see chapter 23, the heart of this Torah reading, is the calendar of sacred time. And in the Jewish tradition, what is the most holy day of the year? Shabbat. How do you know that Shabbat's the most holy day of the year? There are 7 Torah readings on Shabbat. You know how many Torah readings there are on Yom Kippur? 6. 5 on Rosh Hashanah, 4 on holidays, 3 on a weekday. The only day in which there is a prescription of the 7 Torah readings, because it's the holiest day of the year, is once a week, Shabbat. And so on page 724, it opens with holy time, Shabbat. It then goes from there to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to Pesach. It will then go to the first day of the 7th month. Page 727, we'll be moving into Shavuot. You'll see on page 728, Yom Kippur, and ending, remarkably, with the holiday that gets the most press, and that's Sukkot. Though almost as much as Sukkot, in terms of the number of words, is the following on page 726. When you enter the land that I am giving to you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. Okay, so context. This is Moses speaking to the people on behalf of God. They're in the desert. Promised land is yet ahead. When you get to that land, you will be farmers. It will be a land flowing with milk and honey. That's the promise. And when you reap that harvest, you're to take the first sheaf and you bring it to the priest. He, the priest, there are only he's at this time, shall elevate the sheaf before the Lord for acceptance in your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after the Sabbath. Well, that sounds like it should be on Sunday, right? Not right. Now you might say, what do you mean, not right? Here, by the way, the context is, it's Passover, first day after the first day of Passover, meaning the second day of Passover, that's when you're supposed to bring this sheaf and present it to the priest. So again, it's the second day of Passover. He's going to wave it. That's how the rabbis understood it. The priests and the Karaites later on would understand this law, verse 11, to be that it's Passover after the first Sabbath. But the rabbis in the Talmud and Menachot said Sabbath simply means here, holy time. The first day of Passover is holy time. Hence, the second day of Passover is when this should take place. The priests, by the way, the Talmud will record, didn't agree, but the rabbis wrote the book, and that's the way that the counting of the Omer would be remembered. So now continue. On that day that you elevate the sheaf, you shall offer as a burnt offering to the Lord a lamb of the first year without blemish, the grain offering. I'm going to skip. Until that very day, verse 14, you have brought the offerings of your God. You shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears. It is a law that's back to Passover, because the counting is now beginning to take place with Passover. And from the day, now verse 15, on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. All right, we'll just stop there for some commentary, and that is, remarkably, because the Torah is our ancestors' understanding of a relationship with God, when it says you shall count 49 days, that's the law we just read, the rabbis will then debate, how do you do that? And it is in the Talmud and Menachot that they will say, well, when you get to 10 days, you should say, and tonight is the 10th day, 1 week and 3 days. And that's how you're supposed to count. That's how we've learned to count. And they'll say, when you count, you're doing a mitzvah. You're fulfilling an expectation of God to count each day. So there's a blessing you're to recite. Thank you, God, for elevating us through your mitzvot to making us holy with the command to count the Omer. Once again, the Omer is a measurement of barley. That's the first crop in the spring. You're not permitted to eat the barley, as the rabbis will understand it in the Talmud, until you have brought your first offering at Passover. Only then can you eat barley. He waves it around. And then you're allowed to eat it. And then 50 days later with Shavuot, that is another harvest holiday in the Bible. Only harvest holiday in the Bible, the 50 days. In the Bible, it does not say that the Torah was given on Shavuot. Pentecost, Christian holiday, Pentecost is Shavuot, it's 50, Pentecost. That only occurred to me this week, preparing. I always knew they called it Pentecost, but it was only this week that it occurred to me in something I read that Penta, of course, is 50. So the 50th day. So back to the history of ideas and the unfolding of a Jewish life. Here in the Bible, it's an agricultural celebration of waving the barley, and then 50 days later, the spring grains, and in between, continuing to count. But here's something quite beautiful. The mystics of Tzfat, mind you, in 1492, end of the 15th century, the Jews were expelled from Spain. They had lived there for hundreds of years. Earlier, 11th, 12th centuries, was called the Golden Age of Jewry, in which rabbis served, in some cases, as advisors to the local kings of the counties, were doctors, were poets, were in both the Christian and mostly Muslim communities accepted as advisors, but also Christian. So that when the Jews were expelled, when Ferdinand and Isabella, for whom we are grateful that they sent off boats to find America, but those same leaders sought to unify Spain, having expelled the Muslim control of southern Spain, said to the Jews and to the Muslims, you either convert or you leave, because this will be united as a Christian country. And it was a radical break in Jewish continuity. And some of those refugees went to Tzfat, a city in northern Israel. And there they yearned for redemption. There they created prayers that describe the Messianic era. When we chant on Friday night, Yadid Nefesh, a song of longing for God as a lover, or we chant the Lecha Dodi on Friday night. Those were poems written in a circle of mystics in Tzfat of the 16th century. Still, if not themselves, but a generation or two before, having had this cataclysm of security, learning and yearning for redemption. And so here's what they said. They said that when we count the Omer, we are moving from the slavery of Egypt to the gift of Torah. And we need to prepare ourselves. Why 49 days? That number 7 weeks, is wholeness. Covenant for a newborn boy is celebrated on the 8th day. 7 weeks, and then on the first day after, the 50th day, we receive Torah. We enter into covenant with God as our lover. And we have to prepare ourselves. And the mystics of Tzfat, building on the Zohar of the 13th century, said that there are 10 qualities of God, if you will, God's DNA. 7 of those qualities are accessible to us. They are the following. What prompted God to create, to have the idea to create? Love. But love, that's the first of those 7 qualities, chesed, needs a container. Otherwise it can overwhelm. It needs gevura. It needs a vessel. And only when those 2 qualities are balanced can you have harmony of compassion, tiferet. And then, to have a forward motion, you need ambition. You need gevura. You need a sense of wanting and believing, of needing to do more. But that too needs a balance, hod. It needs the balance of knowing that there's a place for humility, not only ambition. And only when those are balanced, netzach and hod, can you in fact have creativity, yesod, or more. Can you have relationship? Only you can have relationship when specifically an ambition to move forward is in balance with the humility of knowing the other as an other, not being your needs, but the other needs. And then you get yesod, you get creativity. That leads to the 7th, the final, which is called Shekhinah, or is called Malchut, which is dignity. And so those are the 7 aspects that are always needing to be in balance. And the mystics of Tzfat said each of the 7 weeks is self-repair on one of those qualities. This week, which is week 5, is the week of humility. What is humility? Humility is first self-restraint. It's the knowledge that you don't do just what you want, but you do something grounded in expectations that are already set in place. That's one aspect of humility. It's not about only me. The other aspect that's related, as I mentioned, to this quality of hod is that there is an other with whom I need to have a relationship in order to be fully myself. And a relationship with another means to honor that he or she, is not me. Humility is the capacity of relationship that leads to gratitude. And so this week is all about humility. And yesterday, Lag BaOmer, each of the 7 days has a subset where it's like the love of humility. To what degree do you bring love and humility? To what degree on the next day is there restraint in your humility? The next day, in what sense is there compassion in your humility? Lag BaOmer, the day of celebration, the day identified with weddings, is humility of humility. It's hod shel hod. That in order to indeed have, you need like humility plus to enter into a lasting relationship, a recognition of the other that you embrace, while always having your own I. It's never about just the thou, it's the I thou. But to have it requires a balance. And so this is the week of humility. I'll pull this together. I wrote a letter yesterday to the Jerusalem Post. I hope they publish what I sent. I did so in response to a friend, Rabbi David Elezri. Rabbi David Elezri is in many ways the Secretary of State for Chabad. It's really quite remarkable how impactful Orange County, California is on the national and even the world Jewish scene. And Rabbi Elezri is one of those players. A lot of people locally may not know it. But when the conservative movement's president and the reform movement's president goes for the presidents of the American leadership in Jerusalem to meet, Rabbi Elezri represents Chabad. I'm really proud of him and he wrote a book called The Secret of Chabad, and I'll tell you the punchline. And the secret of Chabad is a one-way ticket. When you know that you got to make the best of where you have been sent as your lifetime assignment in the army of God, you make the best of it. So Rabbi Elezri wrote an article in the Jerusalem Post 2 weeks ago that I didn't see. I do read the Jerusalem Post, but not actively. But a colleague sent it to me, and he was very upset. And he said, it was an article, a lengthy essay, on why Orthodox Judaism rejects non-Orthodox conversions. And the reason he wrote is because they are not authentically Jewish. Meaning non-Orthodox Judaism is not authentically Jewish, because what is authentically Jewish? It's he writes, from the dawn of history, the giving over of foundational beliefs in God and the going out from Egypt. And if a conservative rabbi, referring to my colleague, Rabbi Wolpe, will say on a high holidays that the way the Bible describes the going out from Egypt is not history, Rabbi Elezri didn't mention in that case, he alluded to a conservative rabbi, but it was Rabbi Wolpe, says, well, that's a rejection of Judaism. If you say that we didn't go out from Egypt the way it's described in the Bible, which, by the way, if you look carefully at how it's described in the Bible, it's over 2 million people walking together for 40 years. If you don't take that literally, he said in his article, that's a rejection of Judaism. So a colleague sent me this article. And he said, how can this man be your friend? Tell me something good about him. He was really upset. And I said, he is my friend. I said, I have pastor friends who have a very different belief system than I do. My pastor friends believe I'm going to go to hell because of a different theology than mine. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that they believe I'm going to go to hell because I'm not scared. It's not my belief. I'm okay with the fact that some people will define Judaism differently than me. For some people, the Zohar, that mystical writing of the 10 Sfirot, was written in the 2nd century. For modern scholars of the Zohar, like my friend Danny Matt, who spent 18 years translating and writing a commentary on the Zohar, it was first introduced, not necessarily its ideas, but as a written document in the 13th century of Spain. Why does he say that? For a variety of reasons. Because, one, a visitor who came to meet the great Moshe de Leon, who was producing the Zohar, arrived just after Moshe de Leon died. And he went to the house, and his wife said, "I'm sorry, but you've gotten here too late. He's passed." And he said, "But I've been studying, what he's been revealing of the Zohar." And she said to him, when we needed money, he would go into the other room and he would write out more pages. But not just that. A great scholar like Danny Matt, who spent 18 years translating and commenting on the Zohar, will show that many of the ideas and even some of the words are derived from Spain of the 12th century, which is only natural. Even the Aramaic used in the writing of the Zohar is not the Aramaic of the 2nd century. And so a modern scholar will look at the Bible and do what's called philology, which is the archaeology of a text. A modern Bible scholar will look at this text and show where the stitching is that put together pieces of a puzzle. And so this is an example. My friend, and he is my friend, Rabbi Elezri, will say as he did to me, what I wrote is that the Zohar is from the 13th century. He said, I believe it's from the 2nd century. I said, that's fine if you believe it's from the 2nd century. I don't need to persuade you. But do know that I have reason to believe what I believe. And what I believe is that ideas have a history, that Judaism unfolded. And I love Torah. I love the custom of counting the Omer. But it's not the way it was described in the Bible. That's the unfolding over time. And so I would want, and I sent the article that I wrote on Friday to the members of the Introduction to Judaism class that asked me to share it since I spoke about it last Sunday before I had written it. I've now written this essay in response to Rabbi Elezri. And I sent it to him. And because he's my friend, he wrote back a very nice note because I wrote it with respect for him. Just like I have, again, respect for my Christian pastors who are evangelical and pray for me. I'm okay that Rabbi Elezri doesn't accept my understanding of Torah, not just me as Eli, but me as a community of rabbis over at least 200 years who have historical lenses when we read sacred text. And not just when we read sacred text, but when we listen to music and when we watch dance. We are aware that there is an unfolding and changing of cultural expressions. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, your commandments elevate us and make us holy. Your commandments are our people's best expectations of what it means to be a nation of priests and a holy people. That is a goal worthy of our best efforts, collectively and individually. But we know that as in any relationship, either between husband or wife or between a community and you, our Creator, expectations and the details unfold with time. May our vow of loyalty endure. May we live in relationship with you in love and sincerity, and may you embrace us in return. Amen.